Well, grace and peace to you from God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. This morning we're going to be looking at the gospel reading which goes into the Beatitudes. And as you can see, there were a lot of Beatitudes, and I don't think I'm going to be able to cover all of them. And so I'm going to be focusing on just one. But before we go into the Beatitudes, I want to ask you guys to think about this. How many of you guys have ever thought this sentence, "I'll be happy when"? And then you fill in that blank with whatever you want. I'll be happy when. For me, growing up, I had a couple I'll be happy whens. I'll be happy when I grow up and move away from my parents' home. Or I'll be happy when I don't have to go to school anymore and it's summertime. Then I grew up and I started to think, I'll be happy when I fall in love and get married. I'll be happy when I buy a new car. I'll be happy when I get promoted. And that list can go on and on of I'll be happy when. And those aren't bad things to think of I'll be happy when, but when will you actually be happy? What does it take? What are the chances that it's going to happen? And how long will it be? Will it just be 1 year? Will I have to wait 5 years or 10 years? Well, Jesus actually has some wisdom on this subject. His wisdom might not make sense to us, but what he has to say seems exactly backwards, maybe even upside down. When you hear what he has to say, you are likely to just write off his wisdom. But don't dismiss Jesus too quickly. Many people have tested Jesus' wisdom and found it to be true. It just takes some getting used to. So when we hear Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," and that's the translation that's in ESV, but I actually want to read what this morning's translation says because I actually enjoy this one way better. It says, "God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him." So the first thing that Jesus does is to change the vocabulary. He doesn't talk about happiness, although some versions of the Bible use the word happy instead of the word blessed. Blessed is a better word because of the ways that we use the word happy. Happiness is taking the summer off or getting that promotion, getting the new car, and for me, happiness is when my favorite sports teams win a game. But Jesus has something different in mind, something that goes deeper, something that seems strange when we first hear it. He'll say, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the gentle, and blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness." Now you see what I mean by people think upside down. Those are not the rules as we know them. As human beings, we think of things completely different. We have different rules. We think, blessed are the rich because they can buy whatever they want. Blessed are the strong because they can take what they want. Blessed are winners, well, because they're not losers. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, but at the best restaurants, because there they can have whatever they want and be filled to the fullest. But Jesus says, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. He goes even further, giving us a total of 9 Beatitudes. And like I said earlier, I can't do justice by trying to do all 9 of them, so I want to focus on that first one. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. And I want to focus on that one because if we can focus on that one, we'll understand all other 9 Beatitudes. This one is the foundation where all others lay on. So when we hear Jesus say, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, the Greek word for poor is poverty. True poverty is a cruel thing. It breaks people. They suffer, confronted daily with their own helplessness. They know the difference that even a small act of mercy can make. They watch eagerly for a gesture or a glance that might promote help. They long for a bit of kindness, and they crave a bit of dignity. So God standing before God, the poor in spirit are like that. They bring nothing in their hands that God needs, and nothing in their hearts that compels God to accept them. But they come in their poverty, hoping for substance. They come in their brokenness to be mended. They come in their sin hoping to be forgiven. They even come in their grief hoping to be comforted. They come in their illness hoping to be healed. They do not come bargaining with God because they have nothing to offer. It is precisely their humility, their openness, that makes them fertile soil to receive God's blessings. And so when we hear Jesus say, God blesses those who are poor and realizes their need for him, blessed are those who come to God on their knees. That isn't the preferred mode of travel that we have. On our knees, we prefer to be in control. We prefer to pay for what we get. We prefer not to be in anyone's debt. We would prefer to pay for everything in cash up front and in person. But Jesus doesn't say that. He says God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. We fight hard not to be poor in spirit. We try to get the best grades that we can so we can get the best job that we can, so we can work as hard as we can and do the best that we can. We try desperately to be in control of our own lives. So I want to share some articles and some news things that I read throughout this week that really tie into this sermon that we're talking about. There's this Newsweek article that had these big words in it that just said, exhausted. The article inside told the people, everyone from the president of Harvard to housewives to single moms to a father juggling 2 jobs, all of those people were exhausted. How many of you guys can relate to just that feeling of exhausted? I know I personally can. I can relate to that. I get so exhausted all the time. But Jesus doesn't say anything about the exhausted. Jesus says God blesses those who are poor in spirit and realizes their need for him. Yes, we are exhausted in part because we are not poor in spirit. We are proud, so desperate to be in control, so desperate to do it our way. And so we spend so much energy on trivial things. We work long hours to buy things that we don't need, to impress people sometimes that we don't even like. Why do we do that? Some years back, I was reading this book, and it had this really funny quote that I thought just tied perfectly into this sermon this morning. And it said, American men are obsessed with money. American women are obsessed with weight. The men talk of gain to gain more money, while the women talk of loss and trying to lose more weight. But I don't know which talk is more boring. And it even concludes and talks about a young boy who was admitted to the hospital with terrible injuries. Shortly thereafter, the boy's father arrived. It was clear from his manner and his clothing that the father had money and was accustomed to giving orders. As the doctor tried to care for the boy, the father began to shout, "Why aren't you doing something? I want the best care that money can buy. I want you to fly him to the best specialist in the country. Do something for my boy." The physician turned to the father and said, "There is nothing that your money can do for your boy. All you can do is wait and pray." You see, when I read that story, I wondered about the father. My first thought was that he probably didn't know how to pray. He was used to demanding what he wanted and buying what he wanted as well. I doubted that he knew how to pray for what he actually wanted. I felt sorry for him because he was facing the most terrible crisis of his life, and his stunted spirituality left him badly unprepared. But Jesus said, we are all been hearing it over and over again, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. And so it occurred to me that this terrible moment might have brought the father face to face with his own limitations. It struck me as very possible that in this crisis, the father might have recognized the deep need that he had so long ignored. It also occurred to me that in that moment, the father might have become poor in spirit, finally able to approach God on his knees, able to acknowledge that he had nothing to bring to the table, able to plead for God's mercy. And it struck me that this might have been a turning point in his life, that in his brokenness, he might have been able for the first time to receive God's blessing. So when Jesus says God blesses those who are poor and realizes their need for him, it fits perfectly into that story. I also want to share this story about a Catholic priest who went to go visit Mother Teresa. He said that the first thing he noticed about her was her constant focus on Jesus. People were always asking questions, and she was always answering in a way that reflected her total focus on Jesus. Her answers sounded at first blush, maybe even simplistic and naive, but the author not only noticed her own personal strength, but also the subtle power of her answers. So the author finally had the opportunity to speak to Mother Teresa himself. He told her of his problems. He spoke of his own struggles, and he asked for her advice. And she answered him simply, if you spend 1 hour a day in contemplative prayer and never do anything which you know is wrong, you will be all right. I want us to listen to that one more time because it sounds so simplistic, but it's so profound. If you spend 1 hour a day in contemplative prayer and never do anything which you know is wrong, then you'll be all right. The author then says, with these words she answered, none but all of my problems as well. It was now up to me to be willing to move to the place where the answer could be heard. So I want to repeat this one more time. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. The meaning of this first beatitude and of all the beatitudes is that God blesses us when we come to God with empty hands, bowing before the throne of grace, ready to receive whatever blessing God chooses to give us, ready to follow in whatever path God chooses to lead us. You see, the promise is God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, but it says, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Notice that Jesus doesn't say the kingdom will be theirs will be the kingdom of heaven, but he says theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We do not have to wait for the kingdom. Jesus says that it is near and we can enter it now. So I'm tempted to conclude this sermon by saying, be poor in spirit so that you will receive God's blessing, but that isn't what Jesus says. Jesus doesn't issue an order, but instead he gives us a blessing. He promises that when our need is greatest, there we will find God, and there we will find blessing. Amen.